All right, everybody, I'm Bret and this is Gain. I am the founder of VoiceBot.ai and Synthedia, and every week we get together and we talk about the generative AI news and all the things going on in the industry. And joining me this week, as per usual, my colleague, Eric Schwartz. Hey, Eric.
Hey, excited to jump right in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got a lot of news every week, probably not as big of a week as we've seen many other weeks in the past. And we just did this last week as well, so we don't have to try to cram in like 2 or 3 weeks worth of
True.
stuff. So we'll be able to get through a lot of different things, but a lot of cool topics to talk about today. We've got an interesting one around whether large language models can actually produce AGI based on their current architectures right now. But then just a lot of news, particularly from Google Cloud Next and some of the things that they've been doing. News from Mistral, from Cohere, so the large language model folks, Grok or X.ai, I should say. Those things are coming along, but just a lot of things to talk about. So let's get right into it. And the first thing I wanted to talk about was, I think, what I would say is the top news of the week. And this was all the announcements that Google made. So you and I both did sort of different takes on this. You've done some deeper discussion on some areas, but let me just talk about or tee this up a little bit. So Google is, I think everybody sort of recognizes, is about a year behind Microsoft in the space, and mostly because Microsoft and OpenAI were just ready to go to market much sooner than Google thought they were going to have to go to market. But they've been catching up, and they've been actually doing some things to put them a little bit ahead in some areas and those types of things. But I will say there's some interesting things going on. They made some cool announcements, but I always feel like I felt this with Cloud Next last August, because I just did this like 8 or 9 months ago, the last one. It seems kind of piecemeal. It's like, yeah, we've got this, and we've got this, we've got this. Whereas when Microsoft brings it out, it seems like a coherent whole, but that's just like a editorial comment right now. We'll talk about a couple different things. So they've got agents, which they talked about, Gemini 1.5 Pro, Gemini Code Assist, Imagen 2 with Text Alive, which is kind of a cool feature, and the Google Axiom ARM chip. They had a lot of other announcements, but I thought most of them were either not as interesting, so this was top 5 list, or we already knew about them. So, but they were just talking about them. But let's talk about agents first. So the Vertex AI agent builder, I think the easy way for people to think about this is the equivalent of Azure Copilot Studio. It's basically a low code, no code type of solution for building your front end application, which taps into a Gemini large language model in this case. So I thought that was very interesting when they rolled that out. They actually demoed customer agents, employee agents, creative agents, data agents, code agents, security agents. They just call everything agents. All right. So the first thing I want to do is, before we go into the agents, we'll just say what these things are, and then I'll tell you my beef about this. So these are the different types of agents they have for self-service. Pretty straightforward. Okay. These are not agents.
No,
they just are doing linguistic gymnastics because they don't want to use the word copilot. They don't want to use the word assistant. Microsoft uses copilot. Google has used assistant just like everybody else. So they call these things agents. Agents in the AI world are not this. These are copilots. So just everybody, don't get confused by this. But Sam Altman also dissembles a little bit on what agents are, because I think everyone wants to talk about agents. But words have meaning, and it's like really helpful if we stick to the meaning sometimes.
I mean, I agree. First of all, you're 100% right. It's a branding exercise more than a technical discussion. We've talked about this before, but the weird bleed over between what used to be very much the technical event versus the sort of public facing event, and how even the most like developer centered technical event is also now a marketing event full of talks and announcements designed to attract the interest of the general public. But related to that, I mean, I think you're right, but I think it's also it's a symptom of the larger issue of like how once upon a time we would just use the term artificial intelligence, but now we have to say no, general artificial intelligence, because the term we use for AI now is not actually what we theoretically actually meant, a few years ago. But I do think that Google understands that step one is trying to catch up to Microsoft before it can even try to get ahead of them.
Okay, so very good point about the technical events being taken over by the marketing teams. I think the marketing team realized that a lot of people didn't pay attention to the marketing events, or they didn't give them as much attention because they're like, that's not where the real stuff happens. And so, but then they took over the marketing events and we're all the worse for it. In any event, we did see some cool stuff, although this was the most scripted Google thing I've ever seen. I could not believe how tightly scripted it was. It's almost like their evangelists are like former actors. I just like the handoffs. I mean, they were, usually there's a charming element of technical people being on stage and trying to be funny and stuff like that. They were sort of polished, but not enough. It was very weird.
It was it reminded me of Apple events circa 2012, that sort of level of very polished, but with people who don't necessarily have that same polish as in their own training.
Yeah, and if anybody watched the developer keynote the next day, it was just as polished. I was thinking, okay, this is just the main keynote. The developer keynote was way too polished because usually it's more like developers talking to developers. But anyway, so that's just like, that's not the important thing. Let's talk about actually what they talked about. Or maybe it is the important thing. Maybe they did it that way because they've had so many flubs recently and they're so afraid of being viewed as behind that they wanted to script it more. In any event, we've got these agents, essentially just a front end, so you can basically build GPTs, but only in Google. And there's something going on with Vertex, which I think is really interesting. They do have some nice features for this. So think about this low code, no code environment. Microsoft has had these things for a while for like chatbots and things like that. They've got it now with Copilot Studio. RAG, we'll talk about that later. Retrieval augmented generation, a way to like use your own data, reduce hallucinations, all good. Search, I think this is a nice feature. Obviously, Google's pretty good at search, being able to connect into that. Running code with code interpreter, function calling, and connectors. So those things are all really good. I think those are like catch-up pieces. Gemini 1.5 Pro, a bunch of people have already tried this, but it's like general availability and preview now. The reason people care about that is it's got the 1 million token context window. So now it's generally available. That's great. Now, how many people actually need that context window is a different question. Whether that's actually good from a from an economic standpoint or latency standpoint, totally different thing. Code Assist, and you can talk about Code Assist a little bit. I was a little confused by that, and maybe there's some clarification there because I think this is different than Cody. Cody's sort of general. This one's really just for APIs, but like I think there's some confusion about that. Just going by their blog post, it's mostly for like building APIs and integrating things, or at least that's the update. Mm-hmm. The text to live is pretty cool because basically you just take an image and it'll like animate it. So I like that. And then they have the ARM chip. And we already did a story about this previously about how Google's working with some other chip makers to take on NVIDIA. So I thought those were pretty cool. You had some other takes on this, Eric. So what would you focus on?
I would say that the two bits, the two pillars that sort of link everything. One is that they want the generative AI features and tools and models to be foundational to Google Cloud. So if you're using Google Cloud, you're using generative AI tools. If you want to use Google's generative AI tools, you have to go through Google Cloud. And the other part is with Gemini Pro. Like you said, it's been in preview, but it hasn't been as available. And also, it's underpinning the Code Assist, which is more of a replacement for the Duet code assistant that they had. And I think that it's like I said, they're trying really hard to match or exceed Microsoft and OpenAI as much as possible, and they're hoping to, and going back to the scripter thing, they're trying to avoid not just the sort of on-stage flubs that they had when they first introduced Bard, but also they had to pull Imogen 2 briefly because it was not performing the way people had hoped, and had to try again. But I think they did better this time, but I also don't know if it's I don't know if it matters, or I also don't know how much of it is that if you have something go wrong and then the term AI next to it, your stock price dives, versus if something goes well and next to the term AI, your stock price goes up. I think that's also part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I would say that like my key takeaway is that Google's in the good enough category now. Google Cloud is in the good enough category now. They actually have the components that people need in order to be successful. So that's fine, even though I think they're still a little bit behind Microsoft Azure and some of the things that they're doing today. Now, there was another thing that I think is interesting, just to shift for people who are in the industry and wanted like the context here. Vertex AI, that's where they're putting all their eggs in that basket. This whole agent thing, that's for you non-coders, is the way they think about it. It's like, oh, if you want a little toy to play with. No, I that's not exactly right. It's going to be like a nice front end for things. But Vertex AI, everything's coming through that. They say they now have access to 100. You have access to 131 models. Now that's not 131 different vendors. Like a lot of companies have like 4, 5, 7 different models. But so dozens of companies providing 131 different models. But what they're trying to do is they're actually trying to put everything through Vertex AI, so that if you want a more flexible system, let's like maybe multi-cloud and stuff like that, I think it's going to be difficult. It's really pretty locked down. So that's just like a little aside that you probably haven't heard anybody talking about, but just looking at the way they're using Vertex AI and how they're basically keeping out technologies that aren't part of their stack or aren't already integrated through Google Cloud Marketplace. Really important. All right. So, but kind of kind of lackluster. I was so open for more. They moved it up, earlier in the year, like before IO and stuff like that. I thought that was a mistake. I thought they would have more. If they just waited 2 months, they would have more to say, but okay. So that's top story of the week. Let's go into some funding news, and we're going to get into like a battery of LLM stories, because we always have those. Those are good. But let's do little ReadAI, $21 million. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So ReadAI, part of the very popular meeting transcription and summarization tool group that really took off during the COVID pandemic. So things like Otter and so on. And then with generative AI, it sort of reached new levels of competence in terms of being able to not only transcribe a meeting and summarize it, but also to pick out key actions and work out who should be doing what. And so this company has been growing pretty quickly with that, and now they're growing from meetings into emails and messaging systems like Slack and Microsoft Teams. And it's not that it's going to change how everyone does business or anything, but it's going to be a competitor for Otter, for several other startups that we've written about, and for in terms of the generative AI element. What stands out for them is that they claim that they are that they solve the hallucination problem that always pops up when you're trying to summarize text, and whether or not it's better.
That's so misleading.
Yeah.
Because like the hallucination problem is not really about like summarizing text. That's about like retrieval, like when you're retrieving facts and information. So
right, and also about a blank space that the AI feels compelled to fill, versus saying that there's nothing there to fill, which is sometimes the case when you're having a meeting or a message back and forth. So yeah, but it's not no money. It's a certainly a significant amount of money for a company like that.
Nothing new here. I think like, but I will say, it's not a terrible idea, and here's why. There's a nuance here, which is actually kind of interesting, which I've come across recently. Not related to them, but to somebody else. So what they're doing is nothing new. Like there are summarization tools in every one of these applications, but the fact that they're doing summarization across applications is the interesting element here. And that might be the thing that actually makes it work. I don't think this is going to come here, because if you there's other ways that you can do this, as opposed to it's like grabbing a new application. So I don't have like a lot of optimism around this, but yes, we do have a balkanization problem where everything gets segmented into silos, and then you have notes everywhere with different systems have summarized them. So how do you pull it all together? Actually, Google Google, what do they call it now? Notebook, LLM Notebook,
Yeah.
might actually solve that. Did they announce LLM Notebook at Cloud Next? I don't think so.
No, I don't think they did. It's sometimes hard to tell when they're announcing like previews or betas versus like an actual.
I just saw a demo of it. I just saw a demo of it in a video. I thought it looked really cool. We'll bring it up later. I'm not gonna people can look it up. It's a way for you basically to add sources and then basically talk to all your sources and like it's almost like a playground, but like you click all your sources, you add them onto the side, and then you can interrogate it with a chatbot, which I think is pretty cool. So ReadAI maybe not gonna set the world on fire, but
Yeah, but it also might be considered. It's almost a the market getting a little more mature because it now has space for small players, medium players, big players in a way that older technology fields do.
yes. All right. Let's move on to more fun stuff. X.ai, $3 billion at an $18 billion. Right now, this is, I guess this is rumors. This stuff could come down, but like anytime Elon Musk is in the news, come on, like there's probably something interesting that's happening. And he does say that the whenever there's doubt, the most humorous outcome is the most likely. So in any event, they raised 135 million in December, which I think not a lot of people reported about, but more recently, 3 billion in funding that they're raising towards 3 billion, and who knows how long that'll take, whether they'll get that $18 billion funding round. But I think it is fairly significant because of this whole idea of matching Anthropic. And that's Anthropic is the clear number two, the clear alternative to OpenAI in the market, just in terms of enthusiasm, activity, valuation, those types of things. Now, you might say Google Gemini is, but they've had so many starts and stops on that. It's hard to say where that is. I think Google's going to do fine with Gemini. But if you're looking for a non-Google solution, let's say, OpenAI is clearly the first among equals anyway in terms of the most adopted. But then Anthropic is like, oh yeah, and let me try out Anthropic. So they're like a second. And if people were around during the rise of the internet and the web, it's like Anthropic is Nortel to OpenAI's Cisco. So it's like a little analogy for those people who've been around a long time.
Yeah.
So they're a good second, but those are the proprietary models. All three of those I just mentioned are proprietary. And X.ai is really focused on the open source space. The Grok 1 model is open source through an Apache 2 license, I think, right now. And now the 1.5 model looks really promising. And, they've only been doing this for 9 months, and they have like something better than GPT 3.5 and approaching 4. So I think this is really significant.
I would say yes. I'd be very curious to know. For Anthropic, it's very clear what they're pitching toward and like where they see, what they're telling investors. Anthropic, it's very clear, like when they're telling investors, like this is why we're worth this much. This is where our revenue will be coming from, and why we're going to be why starting now it's going to be worth that much money. I don't know exactly if X.ai has very similar plan, or if they're pitching it somewhere else because their own unique the pros and cons of their approach. But I would be curious, like how much of the valuation is built around just trying to match Anthropic versus saying, oh, we're also going to be able to do what they're doing in the similar market scale, and that's why we are worth that much money.
Yeah, we have two halo effects here going on too. First, we have the open source halo effect. And so to a certain extent, there's the winner of open source is not identified yet. So Meta with Llama 2 came out, is probably the most widely used to date, but Mistral, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes, is sort of moving up very quickly. But with X.ai, really capable model, now we have another one. Databricks has one, but so there's a little bit of a halo where people have optimism around open source in this space and what it could do, and particularly as we see more enterprise adoption, they want like more control versus what they get from OpenAI or some of the cloud providers. There's another halo effect, which is just Elon Musk. So there are a lot of investors who just look at his track record, and he's turned a lot of things into really big things, or at least he's been part of the team that's done that. And I don't think there's anyone that sort of questions that. There's a lot of other opinions about Musk floating around these days, but I think both of those things do. But if they're going to justify an $18 billion valuation, it does not rest alone on them using the Grok assistant inside of Twitter/X. So this means to me that it's not just they're going to open source it. I think they're going to make this available through the big cloud providers and as an API, so people can tap into it, just like Llama 2. And my guess is that Amazon should be first in line for this, because Google's like, they're all in on Gemini. They're supporting 130 models, but everything is Gemini first over there, and every model maker knows that. Azure is really heavily into OpenAI, and that makes sense. They're actually making new bets as well, with Inflection and Mistral and stuff like that. So that makes sense. Amazon is in this market in part because they've got the investment in Anthropic, but Google also has an investment in Anthropic, and I think they're sort of the house. They're the house LLM right now at AWS. But I think having Grok and maybe getting an exclusive on it, I'm not sure Google would actually even entertain putting this up. Maybe they would. But I think it would be really interesting for them, because if it continues to advance really rapidly in terms of capability, they might actually, for the first time in the industry, have a lead.
Yeah, I think you're totally right that there's partly the question of partnership and either exclusivity or at least priority access to these models. And yeah, the Inflection consumption is suggests that they're not going to be looking to X.ai. But I do wonder, when the companies are that big, with Amazon especially, like how much they want to keep these things internal versus having much more complicated partnership with another company.
I don't think they have a choice, because I just don't see Titan becoming a frontier model.
No, that's true. But I can see them going the Inflection route and maybe not X.ai, but another company like it, where they just absorb it wholesale and make it them.
Oh, that's certainly possible. I could see that as well. But I don't know. It would seem like a logical home for X.ai, because if at that valuation, they need a cloud partner in order to drive scale very quickly. And so AWS seems like the most likely candidate to me. But Microsoft would probably be open to it as well. I don't know. Google's got other things that they're focused on. Hey, folks, this is the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this almost every week, and we just talk about the top news of the day. Please, if you're out there watching, listening, just put in the comments. Let us know you're here. Let us know what you're thinking about, what you're focused on these days, and also give us a like so that people know that we're here. Let us know, and comment on these stories too. If you've got things to say, you think it's interesting. Maybe you think that Google's leading the market, in this space. Probably not, but maybe you do, and we'd love to hear that and have that discussion with you. Okay, so staying in the world of large language models, our friends Mistral did their. Now, these are technology people who know how to do marketing, because all they do is they put a Tor link to their new model in a post on X, and then
with no explanation or comment or context.
Please go to my Tor link.
It's the most French approach I've ever seen.
I don't know. It's so funny. It's just they know their audience. And it's this is open source, so it's going to be developers and all these other types of things. So, in any event. It is another mixture of experts model. And those of you who read Synthedia, and you should read Synthedia. If you don't, subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to voicebot.ai, or just hit voicebot.ai every day. But the newsletter, we talk about MOE and architectures a lot, because we went through different eras of large language model capabilities. So we had the one era where it was just parameters, and then we had an era where it was training tokens. Now we were moving towards a data curation thing, but really it's an architecture thing, and then data curation, sort of the next one that's coming up. Mixture of experts is just a way to, instead of having a unified model where all the parameters are active every time you do a query, you segmented it into multiple. In this case, there's 8 different models inside of one model. So it has supposedly the capacity and the capability of a unified model at 176 billion parameters. But because it's these expert models, so just think about like some sort of domain separation between the different models, you only essentially run 2 at a time. And so when you're at an inference, then you're going to run 44 billion, so 22 billion parameter models. So it's faster, it's less expensive. And there is some thinking as well, though I've never seen anything conclusive on this, that this will reduce hallucinations and those types of things, cross-contamination of things, lost intents and those types of things. So all pretty interesting. So so this is another model. This, I believe, is about the size of what we would know as Mistral Medium, which has never been released as open source. In fact, I'm not even sure it's available anymore. They don't list it. I know there's some people have been using it. This is likely smaller than Mistral Large. It's not clear how big that is, but people think well over 200 billion parameters. That's a proprietary model. So I think it's just interesting. Oh, the other aspect in this is that there is a 65,000 token context window. So that's going to be roughly about 50,000 words, and that's double the previous Mixtral open source model, the Mixture of Experts model, 8x7b.
Yeah, and pretty big for an open weight model like this.
Yeah, very big. In fact, actually, from an open source standpoint, it probably is the largest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think if there is anything that big. Oh, no, well, actually, yeah, because Grok 1.5 has a big context window, but that's not open source yet. Yep.
Yeah, I know. It's funny. It's like, here's 221 gigabytes of LLM to just go ahead and download.
Yeah, and so the other thing that I thought was interesting too is Mistral has updated their website recently, and so it's fairly Spartan as it is, but they have listed a number of customers. And so whether those customers are using the open source or the proprietary through La Plateforme or through Azure is unclear. Some banks, some European companies, but there was an announcement just this week from Snowflake. And so they basically have a text to SQL assistant. So if you're using Snowflake, which, basically modern database company, if you want access to your data inside of Snowflake, you would normally write a SQL query. But now you can use natural language. It'll automatically generate the SQL query, and it'll give you an answer to your query. It'll do a few other things too, where it'll actually inspect data. It'll give you information about your data. It'll give you information about how to improve SQL prompts, all these other types of things. But I thought that was also very interesting that came out this week, and they are using Mistral Large, which is a proprietary model, which you can get directly or through Azure. So it looks like Mistral is not just like winning the PR battle on social media, but they're also winning some customers, and some big customers at that.
Yeah, and to me, you mentioned the revamp of their website, and I honestly wonder how much of that is fueled by how they're trying really hard to partner with government agencies and governments in general in Europe, and Europe, of course, having come out with new, relatively strict regulations, and more probably on the way there. So they're trying to make sure they don't step in any problems before they lock down those contracts to be the generative AI model source for all these agencies.
OpenAI of Europe, right? I think it's like a very good strategy on their part. They are doing a nice job as a company who came into the market well after most of the other big players in the market were established, and they're moving really quickly. So we really see, like, last year was the clash of the proprietary models with this, a little bit of open model stuff here and there, which was interesting. This year seems to be more the clash of the open models, people trying to establish themselves in the open source or open space in that case. All right, so we had another story. You had a story around Cohere as well. So Cohere, another of the what I would consider to be tier 2 LLMs, not tier 2 in terms of, tier 2. They're tier 2 generally in terms of performance, but also in terms of funding and those types of things. But tell me about Command R.
Yeah, well, and Cohere is also one of those companies that started with a very clear vision of we are a business-focused company. So that's what we're, they're not doing a marketing centered event when they announce things. Really, that simply. Yeah, so they have a new model, the Command R Plus, and they put out some benchmark tests for it that show it outperforming GPT-4 Turbo on certain tests. Obviously those benchmark tests can be cherry picked, but the evidence seems to be that it's a really powerful model, even though it's not necessarily at the gigantic scale of 1 million tokens as 128,000 token window, but that's plenty for a lot of businesses. And the idea is that it's supposed to really help companies who want to use software to handle multiple tasks, to automate a lot of business roles, but don't necessarily have the technical staff on hand. And this sort of helps bridge that gap. And they're also working with Microsoft Azure. So this LLM will be in the Azure marketplace. So it's going to boost what Cohere is trying to offer to upsell the enterprises using Azure. And then, of course, Microsoft can score another notch on the belt of LLMs, or at least LLMs with good reputations that are easily accessible through their platform, either exclusively or at least included there. So yeah, it's a good win for both sides. And yeah, Cohere's raised a lot of money. It raised $270 million last summer, so it has plenty of runway to really accelerate the rollout of this LLM and even more LLMs that they've already started announcing since then. Last week.
In the first quarter of last year, it wasn't clear, in terms of the alternative to OpenAI, whether that would be Anthropic or Cohere or AI 21 Labs or even Inflection at that point, I guess, was when that was coming out. But it's very clear that they either by necessity or by plan, focused on what I would consider to be a niche, which could be a really good outcome for them. The other thing too is when their value, I don't know what their current valuation is, but under 10 billion for sure. They have a lower bar to pass. For Anthropic to get to 18 billion in valuation, a lot of things have to work out well for them in order to meet that expectation. Or Cohere, as long as they can get traction. The problem, what we don't know yet, is can you get traction just on this piece? Because a lot of people are looking for general purpose first.
Yeah, I mean, but it's right there in the name. Cohere, it's a coherent company, coherent goals, and I almost feel like subconsciously that reassures potential clients and investors when they hear that name. That's versus true. Some of the broader term companies.
Canadian company as well. I think the challenge is they basically have focused on this RAG space, and it's just not differentiated yet. So, the fact that they have tool use, yes, but it's not an orchestration engine, right? So everybody else has tool use now too. Even Gemini has that. So, yeah. So, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I think it's very interesting. Now, in that RAG database, or the RAG thing, we also had the story that you wrote about CustomGPT. Really, there's a story about RAG in general. So Retrieval Augmented Generation. This, if you want a little history on this, it goes back to 2020. There was a paper out of FAIR, which is the Facebook AI Research Center out of NYU, run by Yann LeCun. Yann LeCun is one of the 3 godfathers of AI they talk about, because there's 3 people won the Turing Award. He, along with Jeff Hinton and Yoshua Bengio. So RAG's been around for a while. And one of the things it does is it basically takes an LLM, and instead of the LLM looking at its training data to give you answers, or looking at the internet to give you answers, it looks at whatever data sources that you point it to. And Retrieval Augmented Generation has a very specific way of treating the data sources. It vectorizes them, puts them all in vector databases, basically a numerical or alphanumeric representation of them, and then will generate your response. Okay, so it's great because it's your data using the LLM, which basically then is just using its language skills, not its knowledge skills, its language skills, to pull from your knowledge. And it has a significant reduction in almost all instances in hallucinations, down to a very manageable level. In fact, sometimes infinitesimal. And so then Tonic is very interesting because they're not originally from this space, but they created a tool that would evaluate RAG performance And they'd done this thing on CustomGPT and several others and just compared it to OpenAI. So tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, so I know Tonic, they've done a lot of really interesting tests there. So they do data synthesis, and they've been sort of running tests of various models, RAG models, against the sort of standard OpenAI GPT system. And when they tested it against CustomGPT.ai, which is one of the more popular platforms for building these sort of custom GPTs, they saw that it outperforms the sort of baseline quite a bit, thanks to RAG and obviously the specific approach that CustomGPT.ai takes. And so yeah, they use this tool Tonic Validate to see how well the model performs at running similar tasks. And yeah, it's again, we're talking about like the diversifying world of generative AI, and this is a sign that even at the not at the top line foundational model levels, but below that, there's still a lot of room for improvement and competition.
Oh, it also just points to this fact that we need tooling. So from a large language model standpoint, we still have some trouble with tooling. And like, how do we know the models are good? How do we compare them? There is tooling out there, but it's a little bit harder. For RAG, there really hasn't been a lot of great ways to test this in any type of persistent and repeatable method. So I think this Tonic thing is interesting. And then Custom GPT, we had them on a webinar this week. We'll have some stuff in Synthedia next week about it. So we'll replay the video and everything. I think like really good turnout. We had over 500 people. A lot of people are interested in RAG because it is such a practical usage for corporations. Custom GPT is interesting because they have a no-code version of it. Like usually you need to tie everything together. You need developers to do it. In this case, they have a no-code solution. So yeah, pretty useful to people. All right. Hey, folks, this is the Generative AI News Rundown. I'm Bret Kinsella. That's Eric Schwartz. We're here every week talking about the latest in generative AI news. Let us know you're out there. Give us a like on LinkedIn, YouTube, or I think we're on live streaming on X as well right now. Sometimes we are. It doesn't always work. Seems to be a more brittle connection than other places. But let us know you're out there. Make comments, questions, those types of things. Okay. So you had another story this week about Poe.
Yeah, this is something I think this kind of story I do still get kind of excited about, maybe because it reminds me of like the sort of earlier days of voice app creation and of mobile app creation in general, but where there's just this new way to make it, essentially it's the custom GPTs of OpenAI, but with a lot more opportunity to pick and choose which models you use to make them. And now Poe, which comes from the team at Cohere, is saying, oh, well, you can actually make money on your model by getting people to subscribe to it and by charging people sort of a per message a price, saying that if you want to message 100 times with this thing,
so you can
AI.
monetize your AI girlfriend bot.
Yeah, although
basically that?
Yes, although Poe is they're not quite as strict, I think, as OpenAI, but they are very much trying to steer into the more family-friendly entertainment / education / stuff. But what's interesting also is that the way they pay people is that you do get paid in real money, but first you have to switch it from these points for server usage, which is a way to that, so that if you're running a server that's not through, if your AI bot is on a server that's not through Cohere and Poe, you can cover those costs without having to go through the rigmarole of putting in real money first. And it's just that it seems like it's really aimed at exactly the kind of people that I was talking about, these early adopters, the people who experiment every time a new technology comes along. And it's
sure.
Yeah, Poe's pretty cool. And of course, the CEO of Cohere has a pretty close eye on what's happening at OpenAI too.
Yeah, he's on the board. The only one who was, well, I guess Sam Altman's back on, but the only one who maintained his board seat. during the
exactly.
OpenAI meltdown. So also very interesting there. Yeah, there's more intrigue. I don't know if you saw it with OpenAI. The information was
Yes.
reporting that 2 of Ilya Sutskever's direct reports just got fired for leaking information, but like there's no information like on what they leaked or anything. Just that, wow, OpenAI is like Apple. If you leak information, you get fired.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, I think I suspect anyone who was more easygoing about that is no longer as easygoing after the drama around Altman getting fired and rehired.
Fair enough. Fair enough. They were in his. I can't remember what they call the group, but it's a technical group. It's kind of like a responsible AI group, but it's technical. Usually, responsible AI groups have no technical people in them. But this was obviously OpenAI is very engineering heavy. But these were people that Sutskever had recruited to sort of work on these things. So the implication is that they were leaking something that was about potential safety risks or something like that. Which who knows? Like just more rumors, but. That's not official news out there, everybody, but it is sort of interesting to watch the drama that seems to continue to swirl around OpenAI.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next thing that's coming up, we have a couple things around this. You did a story last week about Stability AI and their music Stable Audio too, which we didn't get to last week. So that was one story. But then we have this other one around Udio. And then there's like Suno, which you'd written about previously. But let's talk about Udio. They raised some money, but like I think I just package these things together because like sound, music, audio is all the rage all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean it's again it's one of those like been building in the background, and certainly every time there's a deep fake version of a actual famous person, sometimes those songs go viral for a while. But it's what ChatGPT was doing with text, and what DALL-E and Stable Diffusion were doing with images and then video and so on. This is the music side of things. It's about translating written prompts into actual songs, and early on with Refusion and so on, it's not really that impressive. It felt very gimmicky.
That was like, wasn't that December of 2022?
Yeah, and they've changed now. Now that they're actually a company, they've become it's a much more impressive tool, but it still had that sort of it almost felt like a weird kind of trick rather than like an impressive technology. But Udio and Suno sort of go beyond that limit, just in terms of the coherence. Again, the coherence of the sound, and also the fact that it can be instrumental or with lyrics, and the lyrics may not be the most profound or meaningful, but they are at least they do at least make sense. I tried it out a few different ways, and every time, again, I wasn't gonna win a Grammy or anything, but at least I felt like it understood what I was trying to do and was making a strong attempt to match it. So in that article, I even put in an audio, a song that it created about writing about generative AI, and you can see in the lyrics that it's again, at least you understand that this is what the song's about, even if it's not necessarily as poetic as it may be trying to be.
I mean, let me see if it'll play. I'll see if you can. You tell me if you can hear it, because sometimes the audio works in StreamYard, sometimes it doesn't. Can you hear it?
I think.
Could you hear that or no?
It's a little quiet.
No, you couldn't hear it. Okay, so it's sometimes StreamYard doesn't work for the music playthrough. In any event, yeah, we can code the words into the core. Yeah, this is fine. I think Suno is much cooler. I'm actually going to make a prediction here. I don't make very many predictions because we don't have to. We just like watch what happens. It's like amazing. This stuff all plays out in real time. The important element of this story is not what they've done, but the person who made this quote, and that's will.i.am. And I'm just going to go based on history of investment in technology and AI. will.i.am, everything that he's touched has imploded. Can we think of anything that's been successful that he's done?
Well, I don't know how his podcast is going, but I'm guessing.
I mean, like his music career is great, but it's just like somehow he became this tech investor. And I remember, what was it? Was it Omega that he raised
Yeah,
like $120 million for in the voice assistant space? They had this like crazy cool video about how it was going to change business, and like no one bought it. Like,
I think the difference is in this case he's investing, but he's not. It's not his company. He's not like trying to build it. It's just something he's thinks something he thinks will be successful rather than something he thinks he can make successful. But and he's not the only musician investing in it. I think I don't know what the endpoint looks like for Udio, but I wouldn't be surprised if my prediction for them would be some sort of either an acqui-hire by a bigger company or some sort of um, absorption of their technology and the people behind it, because it's even just as a demonstration of what generative AI music can do. There's going to be companies who want to get that team on into their company
sure,
to do it for them.
I think possible. I just think this is a very small niche of the generative AI world, but it's sort of a fun one that everyone can relate to. So that's cool. I just think it's funny that Will.i.am keeps showing up in these things, and it's just like we see a couple of stories and there's a lot of hubbub, and then all of a sudden like they implode. So maybe Udio will do better. He actually did. Will.i.am did have some sort of like device business at some point, and he may have actually sold that to somebody, but like because he's always like I guess he's just an entrepreneur. One of these things is bound to hit big, so maybe it'll be Udio. How is stability or stable audio 2 different?
So what Stable Diffusion did, so sorry, what Stability AI did with their stable audio originally was again much more of what felt like sort of a trick rather than a real tech improvement. But I will say Stable Audio 2 has it had some cool audio to audio prompting. That's one of the things I kind of like, where it's just you, instead of trying to describe the music, you just say make it
Yep.
feel like it's inspired by this. And it's Stability AI as a company feels like it's chaos incarnate, but I can't deny that they keep coming out with new and or improved versions of their technology. So who knows? I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised to see this pop up in other products.
Is Stable Audio 2, is that open source?
I don't believe so. I think it's part of their. Yeah, I think it's not open source, but it's part of their whatever licensing system they have
Okay.
for the closed models.
Yeah, it's going to be available through their API soon. So
Yeah.
it'd be interesting if they open source it, because that would like break open the market a little bit. All right, folks, this is the Generative AI News Rundown. Follow us on synthetia.substack.com, voicebot.ai. I'm Bret Kinsella. That's Eric Schwartz. Humane pin, $700 and mostly bad reviews.
Yeah, the reviews are not good, which doesn't surprise me because it felt like one of those good ideas that then got sort of rushed out to try to hit the moment when everyone's talking about it.
I always thought this was a terrible idea.
My thought on it was that it's has a couple of good ideas in it, but it hasn't done the thing where it's like, what are you doing? What makes it better than your phone or using either Siri or Google Assistant or whatever it is? Like, what it has to have that that killer app thing, and I don't think the laser screen on your hand is the one that's going to do it.
I know that, by the way. It's cool. It demos nicely, but if people that haven't seen it, like it'll basically do like a little, it'll project an image onto your hand, so that you can actually see information. So that is kind of clever, but like maybe not that useful. Like there's this picture, and if everyone's listening to this afterwards, you won't be able to see it. But he's like tapping it on his chest, and I just have this picture of Star Trek. And like you're just like tapping the little emblem. If they'd actually made it in the shape of, what was the Star Trek
The
symbol?
Delta.
It was
The
like
Delta
a stylized Delta type of thing. Yeah. So if they'd made it like that, maybe they'd have a little bit more nostalgia associated with that. I just think like these devices are just not what people want. they're impractical. Like glasses are a different thing, right? So smart glasses make total sense to me. I know everybody's trying to do these other types of things. I'm just not like a huge fan of them because I just think they're just impractical. I do like the idea though that people are trying to think about hands-free stuff. Now, frankly, a watch would be good. But really, what you want, they want to be able to have a camera, right? So what you do is you do the watch with the glasses, and then you have it all. This whole thing about putting it on your chest and like what happens if you put your jacket on? Like, I mean, these people live in like warm weather climates, like they don't get out much. So like you just like move it to the front of your jacket, but then when you take your jacket off, you have to move it again. It's like silly.
Well, and it's also the part of what makes generative AI or large language models interesting in terms of consumer stuff is that it can tell you things that you wouldn't have thought to ask about or expand on things or notice things. If you could tell the Humane AI pin like, hey, keep an eye out as I'm walking down the street in case you see like any sales going on to stores or
this
something.
is
I don't
such
know.
a niche, ridiculous use case. Come on,
Yeah,
Eric.
I don't know
can do
what, but
better
it's
than
exactly
this.
it. It's like, what are you doing it for? Honestly, what I would want is if you could get it to connect to an earpiece in your ear and then like help
Okay.
you with social interactions, maybe remind you who people are, and recognizes
Yes.
them, like
Sounds
things
like,
like that.
oh, so what you want is you want Google Glass
Right, but without being, you want an unobtrusive Google Glass, which is the
without
whole
being a
point of
glass
Google
hole.
Glass.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, no, I think that's cool. In any event, I just think these devices are kind of silly. I don't actually, I like the people that are inventing them. So like, don't get me wrong. I like people that are trying things because, sometimes you don't know what's going to really hit. Um, but some of these things, it's like, I think they're not like it's not humans that are making these things because it's just like this isn't the way we live. Okay, in any event, before we go to winners and losers of the week, one of everyone's favorite sections, we're going to talk about this piece that I did at Synthedia over the weekend. 4 shortcomings of large language models. Yann LeCun, research in AGI. So Yann LeCun was on the Lex Friedman podcast. He's been on several times, probably at least his third appearance on there. And Lex Friedman, was talking to him about, hey, large language models, autoregressive large language models. What's an autoregressive large language model, you ask? It is all the LLMs that are popular that we talked about today. What they do is they look at the last few words in order to predict the next word. They don't have any understanding of any of the words. It's really just a math problem. So that's the thing. Now there are some people who believe that like there's a model of the world and all these other things, but that's what Yann is saying. So basically, these are autoregressive. Will never get you to AGI. Again, back to definitions like AGI. What does that mean? It means different things to different people. There is actually an interesting definition from 1998, but we don't need to go into that. In any event, everyone just says, hey, the next phase, like what's the next level up where the systems actually have intelligence as opposed to just next word prediction. LeCun says, listen, our current autoregressive models can't get there. And basically, he said there's 4 reasons. First of all, they don't understand the world. They don't have a world model. Now, Ilya Sutskever rejects this. He says they do have a world model because they looked at all this text. LeCun says, no way. He says, basically, they just know what people have talked about. It's an abstraction of an abstraction of an abstraction. So if they don't have an understanding of the world, they don't have things like common sense, right? So that's like one of the things that, and he said, basically, we're not going to get past this. Now, what I did in this piece, if people want to look at it, and maybe Andrew can put it in the chat for us, is I actually cited about it, a lot of research. I just went into archive, looked at some of the research, some of it I already knew about, and some things that Sutskever had said. So I did a little point counterpoint, but there's a lot of things that sort of back this up. Also, persistent memory. He says the LLMs don't have memory, so they can't really be like us as humans because we have persistent memory. Now, we've seen with ChatGPT, they're trying to add that to there because obviously you don't want to start over every time. If it's going to be a true assistant, like a person, they would know you, they would have information, that type of thing. So you need some sort of persistent memory. And this is something people are working on, but LeCun basically says the autoregressive models aren't going to handle this well, which I think there's some good arguments to that. They don't have reasoning. Another controversial thing. Everybody talks about this. My good friend Brad Abrams talks about this. A lot of people talk about the idea that these models can reason, but they're using the term in terms of mimicking reasoning. They're not actually reasoning the way humans do. They're still just doing prediction. Now, the thing that was, Paul Sweeney said the OpenAI leaks were about reasoning for LLM. So maybe he's seen something that I haven't seen on it. Okay. OpenAI Ilya Sutskever and his team put something out last year about process reward models. Everything today is an outcome reward model. When you train it based on the right outcome. But if you have these multi-step processes, which is what reasoning generally is, when you get the wrong outcome, you don't know how to make it better because you don't know which of the multiple steps failed. Process reward models actually rewarded each step along the process, and so they learn much faster. This is where Q learning comes in, and that whole Q star thing comes in. In any event, that's probably what they leaked, which was kind of cool. All right, so, but reasoning, there's a lot of evidence to suggest the models don't actually reason in the way we think of it from a human standpoint. Deductive, adductive, inductive, they don't really do that. They still are doing next word prediction. There are some tools or approaches you can use to make that better, or to help it mimic human reasoning and get correct answers. But it's not true reasoning in the way that humans reason because they don't have this concept of the world. They don't have memory. They don't have this idea of logic, and they don't have planning. So this is the other thing, and this was probably the biggest one, is that basically LLMs will never be able to plan. As a human, you can plan. You can have this idea that if these series of events are executed by you, like some outcome will be there. Now, it's not to say that you couldn't have an LLM develop a plan for you, but this idea of multivariant planning is very hard for LLMs, partially because they don't have the model of the world, but they also don't have all the real-time information that you have as an individual. So I'll just turn it over to you, Eric, or if people have questions and want to make comments on it. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think I agree with a lot of what he says. I think part of the I guess not the issue, but the expectation that we have about technology in terms of being reliable and repeatable all the time, it sort of went out the window with generative AI. And then the question of how do you either replace it or work around it in regards to the future models is always going to be up for debate. I don't know. I do think these questions are important, but I do wonder if it's going to be a few years from now where suddenly everyone is asking these questions versus now when there's a lot of open optimism or just feels a lot more the future feels a lot more blank in terms of what can be accomplished.
Well, in any event, LeCun does have this whole idea of a JEPA model, which is different than an autoregressive model, which takes in more vision and other types of sensory input. And he thinks that is going to be a path there's no more evidence that that'll be the path than there is for autoregressive LLMs. But I think the key point here is that I would take away from this is don't impute human behavior and capabilities on these things, even though they mimic it really well. Despite that, don't worry about it because they actually do a lot of things that are super useful. So they don't have to work the way humans interact or react, produce things in order to have value. And so that's the way I really think about this, is that I think a lot of these companies LLM companies are actually chasing AGI, which is fine. It's good to have a big, hairy, audacious goal. But if they're doing that at the expense of actually making these systems really good at what they do, that's going to be a downside for everybody. So let's make sure that we get the value out of the stage that we're in. There's going to be some stage which is better than this, whether it's AGI or something else. But that's the nature of technology. It's just going to be, we had voice assistants 4 years ago. They were pretty good do engines. They weren't very good knowing engines. Now we've got ChatGPT. It's a really good knowing engine, actually not a very good doing engine. So like these things are going to move forward, but like what we have today, and I was having a conversation with Jürgen Gravestein on LinkedIn. He sort of felt like he was being gaslit by Google in terms of how great all this stuff was. And I was just like, well, if your point is like, they're not talking about hallucinations, okay, I get it. But for the most part, like the stuff is really good and they should talk about all the good things it can do. Paul Sweeney says, didn't David Bowie call the internet an alien intelligence? He was Yeah, absolutely. I think that was 1999. I remember it was like on 60 Minutes or something like that. I remember watching that. Yeah, of course. It's just totally different. And this is one of the big problems. In fact, Paul Sweeney and I have talked about this. Like most people don't have the mental model to understand how to use this technology. But what we do is we make all these analogies to things that we do know, which is fine. That's a very human thing. But we want to equate these things to humans. I'm just saying they don't have to be like humans. They don't have to be species, as Larry Page would like to talk about them. They can just be really great tools. And so that's the way I look at them.
Yeah, you don't have to understand something in order to completely in order to be able to find value in it, a tool to find value in it.
Well, that's true because like actually even like all the people creating these models don't actually understand how they work, which is like the great secret of the industry. Unless you're in the industry and like with researchers, are like it's we just throw a lot of data at it. And we have some theories about why it works. I'm not sure. Okay, winners and losers of the week. Eric, who's your winner this week?
Well, it's funny we didn't even get to all of them, but I was going to say people who like to mix a little AI in their music, because not only do we have the Stable Diffusion and Udio and so on, but even existing songs can have a little more AI in them with the new Spotify tool that actually uses AI to create a playlist based on any kind of prompt that you want to put in to into its sort of chatbot model. And I've seen some demos of it, and it's a surprisingly flexible tool. Although Spotify doesn't have all the music in the world, of course, but if you are content with what Spotify does have, you might find some things that you didn't realize would fit your mood for the moment.
Okay. I'll say open source developers, largely because you have a nice new fancy, fairly large model from Mistral. If you want to develop an open source, that's going to be very you're going to need a bigger machine than the other ones, but I think that's going to be good. Plus, maybe we'll get some good stuff out of X.ai, with sort of Grok 1.5 and stuff like that. So I think that that's very positive. On the negative front, I'm going to say anybody who bought a Humane pin, because I don't think they're going to be around long.
Yeah, that was going to be mine. Anyone who left CES and immediately put in a pre-order for Humane. But it makes me wonder what's going to happen with the rabbit was also very got a lot of attention. I'm curious to see if it's Humane reviews are going to impact the next device's sales.
Yeah, that's possibly true. I just think rabbit though that the device is sort of it's not the end goal. I think the end goal is a model that they just have an endpoint to, that they everyone connects to their API and then they sell that, and that the device is just a way to get it out there. If their goal is really to sell that device, they've sold a few of them, then probably not going to work out because nobody wants yet another device to carry around. But if their goal is to use that as basically a demonstration solution, then so that people like connect to their API for like business uses, yeah, like I think that's a win.
That'd be a win for Perplexity then too.
Yeah. Paul Sweeney says we need to put down humanely or something like that. That's pretty fun. All right, folks, this has been your Generative AI News Rundown for this week. I hope you learned a lot. That's Eric Schwartz. I'm Bret Kinsella, File Synthetia, File VoiceBot. Join us again. I think we'll be back next Friday. So join us next Friday at 11 a.m. And I'm going to this cool conference. It's like invite only at MIT. It's going to be all like LeCun's going to be there, Stephen Wolfram. So I'll have a report on that. Should be pretty great. All right, buddy. Bye-bye.